Live from London, this is Global Business.
Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Robin Dwyer.
And I'm Sally Burdett. Our top stories. China opens an investigation into possible trade barriers imposed by the European Union after a series of disputes.
China's inflation numbers miss expectations while pressure remains on consumer demand.
F-16 fighter jets on their way to Ukraine as NATO works to Trump-proof its position in the conflict.
French President Emmanuel Macron urges mainstream parties to form a coalition after Sunday's election resulted in a hung parliament.
And breakdancing breaks into the mainstream, and China's youth are celebrating.
China has opened a formal investigation into possible trade barriers imposed by the European Union.
Tension has been growing between the two. Earlier this year, measures were imposed by Brussels following allegations of Chinese state subsidies for companies making electric vehicles, solar panels and other products.
Our correspondent Li Jianhua is following the story. Jianhua, tell us more about this investigation.
Well, Robin, you know, it's an investigation into an investigation. As I said in the opening, it's an investigation by China into whether the EU's investigation into Chinese exports to the EU could constitute an illegal trade barrier. The investigation by China will be completed by the 10th of January, but it is likely to be extended to mid-April depending on the situation. So what sectors are involved? According to the statement from the Chinese Commerce Ministry, a range of sectors including real, solar and wind power and equipment and security equipment will be covered. The EU investigated Chinese companies bidding for some projects in the bloc earlier this year. These include a probe into if Chinese subsidies give wind turbine companies an unfair advantage in the competition. For the competition for projects in Spain, Greece, France, Romania and Bulgaria. Apart from that, the EU also investigated Chinese companies for bidding for a solar park in Romania and for the procurement of 20 electric trains in Bulgaria. What will happen next if the EU measures are determined illegal by China? Beijing can start bilateral talks, multilateral dispute settlements and other appropriate measures. I'm quoting appropriate measures. And these appropriate measures may include retaliatory tariffs on the EU's exports to China after the investigation. And earlier I reached out to the European Commission, but they haven't replied to my email yet.
All right, so give us a little bit of context, Jianhua. What has actually been happening between the EU and China? There's been a series of problems.
Yeah, you're right, and we do see some trade tensions between China and the 27-nation trading bloc, despite frequent high-level exchanges starting last year. At the center of the tension is the EU's provisional duties as high as nearly 38% on Chinese-made electric cars. They started the investigation in October last year, and the tariffs started to kick in on the 4th of July. And in November, they will reassess the situation to find out if they should continue or have long-lasting tariffs on Chinese-made cars. And I have to bear in mind the tariffs are not only on Chinese brands, but also on some European and American brands that are made in China that have been exported to Europe, including Tesla and BMW. And China have been rolling out the rows of investigations so far. So according to industry insiders quoted by China Media Group, Beijing was considering to impose higher tariffs on passenger cars from Europe with bigger engines, namely engines bigger than 2.5 litres. And Germany now so far is the largest exporter of passenger cars with bigger engines to China. So that's why German economy minister was in Beijing in June trying to find out if they can reach any consensus to iron out the difference. And also in June, China opened an investigation into pork originating from the EU. This time it is not Germany, Spain is EU's biggest pork exporter, and they are calling for some measures now. And in January this year, China announced an anti-dumping probe into European brandy. French cognac producer was so worried about that because they could be hit really hard if China raised the tariffs on brandy, because 99% of China's imported brandy was from France. And that is why French President presented two bottles of cognac to President Xi Jinping during his state visit to Europe in May, which was later called cognac diplomacy. Despite so many rounds of investigation from China, China hasn't raised the tariffs or additional tariffs on EU products yet.
All right, but that investigation now underway until January at least. Thank you very much, Li Jinhua, for bringing us the latest on that story. Now, China's consumer prices gained for the 5th straight month in June, but the increase was less than expected.
Official data shows the consumer price index up 0.2% year-on-year, slightly lower than the rise in May. Core CPI, which excludes food and energy prices, went up 0.6%.
Meanwhile, the producer price index was down 0.8%, which was actually a much smaller drop compared to the past few months. That was largely down to recoveries in mining and food processing sectors.
Let's talk now to Xiaolin Chen, who's head of international at Crane Shares. Good to see you. Welcome back to the programme. So we've seen that consumer price inflation did rise in China in June, but it missed expectations. So what's going on?
Probably 2 or 3 things I think is happening. One is seasonality, as the whole nation is now approaching the peak of the summer. You have a lot better of supplies locally and also across cities, across province, that food become more, available. China's CPI basket is very different from the CPI basket of ours here. In London, for instance, in the UK, is heavily on energy, household spending, so on and so forth, where China's CPI is still heavily on food. When, now it's summer, a lot of the fruits and, veggies and pork slightly relatively become a bit cheaper. And also people now has, more tendency towards a more healthy diet. I did notice in the recent months, though the pork price did increase, but I did notice in recent months, if not years, that people start to choose more healthy diet. Less, you remember, like a few years ago, that we heavily focus on the pork price is what the household is spending. So one is seasonality, a bit of a rebalancing of the Chinese people's favorite of preferences on diet. Third, I wouldn't necessarily think it's just very linked, because the index itself reflects the price, but not really the spending. People is now buying prices cheaper, but it's also the season, summer's approach. I was literally in China in June to attend Summer Davos. I do, walk around a bit on the streets and see how people, normal life are. I see some of the restaurants, just walk on the streets, random streets, and to see restaurants. Kind of like 80-90% back out dining. May not be necessarily the perfect time as 2019. I think there's room to go for consumers to pick up, but I think CPI is probably facing a bit of cyclical.
Well, room for consumers to pick up. It has been persistently weak in China, hasn't it, domestic demand? What are the broader economic implications of that?
It's very obvious. A lot of people is on the fence watching now, including Chinese owned domestic investor corporates, and some of the big institutional investors are doing similar things. People are kind of waiting for who is going to make the first move. The regulators has been consistent in implementing policies to stay accommodative. I feel still not so enough of the action to boost the market. Now there's a bit of a circulated message thinking that the national team in China will start to buy in a big way. Not only the large market cap stocks will start to support the small mid space. That's the real private sector in China. That potentially can help, but I still think the credit got to pick up, the action got to happen. The other thing is more clear directions of where domestically they can focus on growing rather than externally. I think externally going to continue to face challenge. You are right. The corporate teams continue to buy. The national team continue to buy. But at the end of the day, investors are marginally improved on their sentiments of the Chinese equities, have a toe in, but not a completely phase in.
Xiaolin Chen, Head of International at Crane Shares, thanks as always for joining us on the programme.
Thank you.
Pork is a significant component of China's consumer price index. The meat makes up nearly 3% of the total products used to calculate the overall percentage. Our correspondent Yu Bo-kun reports from Beijing.
At 8 o'clock in the morning, merchants at Beijing's Xinfadi market, the city's largest wholesale food market, are bustling with pork sales. The staple of Chinese cuisine, which holds considerable weight in the country's CPI basket, saw prices jumped by more than 18% in June, following a 4.6% increase in May.
The price of pork ribs has risen by 2-3 yuan per kilogram.
Pork prices in June reached their highest point in the first half of the year, primarily due to increased live hog costs.
Data shows that in June, the average wholesale price of live pigs at Beijing's Xinfadi market soared to $3 per kilogram, marking a nearly 16% surge from May and over a 30% leap from the previous year. The surge was largely driven by a constrained supply of live pigs, with reduced breeding soil inventories and sellers withholding sales. However, analysts say that stabilization in prices starting from late June.
We don't foresee significant further declines in pork prices. The upward trend isn't pronounced, and overall, prices have remained relatively stable.
In addition to pork, egg prices nationwide experienced fluctuations in June due to supply shortages caused by extreme weather conditions. According to the Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Affairs, the average wholesale price of eggs in June increased by 4.8% compared to previous month. Experts say that egg consumption will peak in July, with market demand gradually improving and seasonal price increases anticipated. Yu Bokun, CGTN.
China's auto industry has experienced robust growth in the first half of the year, with significant increases in both production and sales. China's Association of Automobile Manufacturers reports auto production rose by nearly 5% compared to the previous year, reaching 13.8 million units. Meanwhile, sales surpassed 14 million units, including new energy vehicles. Fast fashion retailer Shein has announced it will invest up to $271 million over 5 years in the UK and Europe. It follows criticism over its business model of flying cheap clothes and accessories from Chinese factories to shoppers worldwide. Shein's also preparing for a possible IPO listing in London. Taiwan, a semiconductor manufacturing company, has reported an annual sales increase of 33%, beating expectations. Second quarter earnings for the chipmaker, which supplies tech giants like Apple and Nvidia, stood at more than $20 billion. The rise has been driven by increasing demand for artificial intelligence. Volkswagen shares have slipped after sluggish electric vehicle sales in China and news of a possible plant closure in Belgium. Deliveries to China were down 20% in the second quarter, partly due to the car maker's market share being eaten up by Chinese EV manufacturers. A spokesperson for the company said it's expecting a difficult year.
Now, U.S. markets are in positive territory again as the chair of the Federal Reserve gives his second day of testimony on Capitol Hill. Bets on a September rate cut rose after Jerome Powell's comments on Tuesday. The markets are now waiting for key inflation data. Our correspondent Karina Mitchell is in New York and joins us now. Hello, Karina. So day 2 for Jay Powell. Has he been giving any more positive signals about a rate cut?
Well, good afternoon to you both. Well, he really didn't deviate too much from testimony he gave before the Senate in yesterday's session. He refused to lock himself in on any sort of timing for any potential rate cut. But he did re-emphasize that the U.S. economy is no longer overheated and that it's important to focus on its dual mandates and not just looking at inflation coming down, but also maintaining maximum employment. He did say the labor market has come into better balance. The Fed really can't afford to see any weakness in the labor market. So over the course of the last 2 days, he does seem to be a little bit more dovish in his comments, opening the door just a crack to the potential of seeing a rate cut in September. Of course, markets are betting that is when we see this first rate cut. But there's been a lot of politicking both in the House and the Senate over the timing of these rate cuts, because obviously we have a key presidential election coming up in November. Democrats would love to see that rate cut come in ahead of that to bolster Biden's approval and amongst voters. And then Republicans obviously want to hold off on that. Powell has said it's very important to remain independent on any sort of rate decisions. And then again, over the course of the last 2 days, he's been talking about looking for more data for confidence to see that inflation is trending towards its 2% target. As you mentioned, we are awaiting key inflation data. CPI for June releases in just under 24 hours.
Also, we're hearing that Microsoft has given up its seat on the board of OpenAI. Is this all to do with the relationship between big tech and these smaller AI startups?
Yeah, absolutely. You hit the nail on the head. So this is a relationship that's been ongoing for a while, and Microsoft reportedly has pumped in about $13 billion into its partnership with OpenAI. So it took a seat, as an observer on the board back in November. It said it did that to make sure to quell any sort of notion that it had overreach or had some sort of ability to compromise OpenAI's decision making. And now, according to reports from CNBC, reporting that in a letter it's saying it's now stepping back, giving up that seat on the board, that it's gained a lot of insight into how the board operates without compromising any of its independence. Now, many people are saying they're really taking a step back because of regulatory scrutiny that is happening over the association between these two companies. The European Commission has broadly been looking into AI and its relationship with big tech, as you mentioned, both in Europe and the US, but it's been keenly focused on this particular relationship. Now, it has said that there was no compromise of independence in the relationship, but it still is scrutinizing, and it's looking for third-party viewpoints because it does still have lingering doubts between the relationship of big tech and AI. Microsoft stock is up on this news today.
All right.
Robin and Sally.
Thank you so much. Karina Mitchell coming to us from New York there.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. NATO leaders pledge new support for Ukraine, but Donald Trump's potential return to power hangs over the summit.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
I think it should be more global cooperation.
I would like to hear more the voice of the developing countries.
Globalization has lifted more than 1 billion people out of poverty.
The green transition has to happen. It's a necessity.
Well, China and the United States are important powers in the world.
What unites us is much more than what divides us. And I believe China is committed to this agenda.
Join me, Juliet Mann, to set the agenda at these times every weekend on CGTN.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe.
At least 30 Palestinians have been killed in an Israeli airstrike on a school housing displaced people in Gaza. It comes as the Israeli army orders tens of thousands to flee Gaza City in the center of the enclave and Khan Yunis in the south.
Meanwhile, mediators from the United States, Egypt and Qatar are set to resume ceasefire talks in Doha. Hamas says Israel's accelerated offensive could derail a truce agreement and bring negotiations back to square one.
Our correspondent Akram Al-Sassari reports from Khan Yunis.
The situation that has been unfolding in the last few days has been bringing the Palestinians to square one. Square one is the very first days of war, when the bombardment was getting heavier every single moment or even every single second, where hundreds of thousands of Palestinians were leaving their homes, fleeing under fire. Some of them were not fortunate enough to survive. Some of them were shot in the streets. Some of them were buried under the rubble of their homes and were targeted. The situation as it is now is the fact that Israeli occupation forces have have been communicating with hundreds of thousands of Palestinians, have been informing them either by airdrop flyers or by phone calls that are recorded and asking them to leave the Gaza City. When they are asking them to leave the Gaza City, they are technically asking people who are living on a land that is around 74 square kilometers to leave that area and head south, where they are telling them that Gaza is a very serious and a very dangerous battlefield, and they have been targeting the people. They have been targeting people in Tell el-Hawa area where Palestinians were injured and killed, and where some reports about those incidents have been telling that horrors have been taking place. Some people are still under the rubble of their houses. So overall, around 56 Palestinians were killed, 30 of whom were the Palestinians who were targeted in the school that was used as a shelter. Today, since the morning, around 22 Palestinians were killed in several different incidents in areas of Gaza, in areas of Gaza Central area, and also Rafah and Khan Yunis. The situation is extremely catastrophic. People are still moving and trying to flee from the heavy bombardment area. People of Rafah have been also under a significant fire. Some people have been taken to the hospitals. Today, at least 4 to 5 people were brought to the field hospitals because of the quadcopter fire. So Israel is using different military means to make the Palestinians leave their homes. 250,000 were leaving in Khan Yunis area when they received instructions from the Israeli occupation forces to leave and head to the west of the city. Around 400,000 other Palestinians in Gaza are now at the immediate and imminent risk of death because of the ongoing bombardment.
Akram al-Sashri in Gaza. Israel says 60% of Hamas fighters have either been killed or wounded in the 9-month conflict. Let's speak to our correspondent, Jonathan Regev, in Tel Aviv. Hello, Jonathan. So what have you been hearing from Israel on the operation in Gaza?
The number which you stated is quite substantial, 60%. But let's remember, the war has been going on for 9 months. And if really 60% of the militants in Gaza have been either killed or injured, what about the other 40%? That's quite a substantial number. It will take Israel months and months to deal with them. If it took Israel so far 60%, this time to take out 60% of the militants. So questions are rising as to how long this war should continue. It of course may have implications on the ceasefire negotiations now taking place. Is Israel really able to find, detect, and either kill or injure or capture each and every militant in Gaza? These are questions that are being asked. Defense Minister Yoav Gallant is the one that brought these numbers up, and he's speaking about the Israeli will to deal not only with Hamas members in Gaza, but also those abroad. Let's listen to what he had to say.
I assume we'll get to every Hamas militant, from the first to the last. From those in the tunnels, to those who wear three-piece suits and travel around the world in luxury jets, and those complicit in the October 7th murders.
Those complicit and those wearing three-piece suits, says the defense minister. That means not only Yahya Sinwar and Muhammad Deif, who are somewhere deep under the ground in the Gaza tunnels, but he's also referring to the Hamas leadership in Qatar. As far as Israel is concerned, as far as Yoav Gallant is concerned, they're all targets.
And then within Israel, we're hearing that draft letters are being sent out to the ultra-Orthodox Jews. Of course, this is following a decision by the Supreme Court. What's been the response to these draft letters?
This issue has the potential to be a major headache for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, because, as you mentioned, the draft calls will be sent soon to the ultra-Orthodox. This according to the Supreme Court decision, which you mentioned. But the rabbis, the religious and spiritual leaders of those ultra-Orthodox are telling them, you do not go there, even if you get the call, even if you're called to come to the army, what is called here the first call, in which initial tests are being taken by the youngsters before even going to the army. And the question now is, who do these people listen to? The state, represented in this case by the defense minister, or the spiritual leadership, represented by the rabbis? The ultra-Orthodox are a very important members of the coalition by Benjamin Netanyahu. Two ultra-Orthodox parties are part of the coalition, and they, of course, do not want their youngsters to go to the army. This is something that has been going on for 76 years since the State of Israel has been established, but now more and more calls are for them to go to the army, since the army is basically short-handed. They need more people, and this is something that has been seen since this war began more than 9 months ago. Benjamin Netanyahu, on the one hand, has this decision by the Supreme Court, which he has to adhere to. On the other hand, he depends on the ultra-Orthodox parties for his coalition to survive. They oppose this bill, so what will it be? Yet another headache for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. As was mentioned many times before, it is not the opposition, it is not even the major protests that we see here on the streets which are posing the greatest danger for Benjamin Netanyahu and the coalition. It is those rifts inside the coalition which worry him the most.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. That, of course, is Jonathan Regev in Tel Aviv.
The U.S. Secretary of State says F-16s will be flying over the skies of Ukraine this summer, with fighter jets already on their way from Denmark and the Netherlands. Antony Blinken was speaking as NATO leaders meet in Washington for a summit marking the alliance's 75th anniversary. A new aid package is expected to be confirmed, alongside a declaration that Ukraine is on an irreversible path to full NATO membership. Let's talk now to our correspondent Kate Fisher in Washington. Good to see you, Kate. So NATO expected to approve more aid for Ukraine, but President Zelensky is there pushing for even more.
Yeah, absolutely. He does want more. He always wants more. The alliance is vowing to pour more weapons into Ukraine for another year. And as you mentioned there, Antony Blinken just a few hours ago saying that F-16 fighter jets are on the way as we speak. The US and other NATO allies are also going to be sending Ukraine dozens of air defense systems in the coming months, and they include at least 4 of these powerful Patriot systems that Kyiv's been desperately trying to get to try to fend off these increasing Russian attacks. And of course we saw a dreadful one this week. The US is partnering with Germany, Italy, the Netherlands and Romania on donating those Patriot missile batteries. But that big prize, membership of NATO, is off the table for the moment, for now, but Ukraine has been told that there is a irreversible path to membership if when it meets the conditions that it needs to meet. But yes, you're right, Zelensky still calling for more, urging the US president to be uncompromising in defending democracy and asking for weapons with deep strike capabilities.
So US President Joe Biden at this summit, of course, but it's the former US President Donald Trump who is casting a shadow over this summit.
Yeah, absolutely. A huge shadow, especially given all the questions at the moment over Joe Biden's health and what is going to happen to the Democratic ticket. All those leaders here in Washington right now concerned about what it would mean if there is a Trump presidency, what it would mean for the future of the alliance, because Donald Trump in the past has vowed to bring an end to the war in Ukraine immediately as soon as he takes office. He's questioned sending aid to Ukraine, if it would even continue, and of course threatened to withdraw from NATO itself. While campaigning back in February, he said he wouldn't provide military protection to any member state if they hadn't met those financial obligations, and in fact that he would encourage adversaries to do, and I quote here, whatever the hell they want to that nation. So there is huge concern here amongst the leaders about what will happen if Donald Trump comes to power. They're trying to Trump-proof that military aid for Ukraine. They're doing that by, instead of the US administering most of it, they're going to move that to NATO, and they will coordinate centrally the spending of that aid, which will make it harder but not impossible for a Trump administration to thwart those aid efforts. But yes, there is huge concern here about what a Trump presidency will mean for the future of NATO and peace in Europe.
Kate, thank you very much. Our correspondent Kate Fisher in Washington.
Well, the NATO summit is being closely watched in Russia. Let's go to Moscow and speak to our correspondent, Dasha Chernyshova. Hello, Dasha. So, has there been any specific response to the summit from the Kremlin?
Well, indeed, we've heard the Kremlin saying that all the decisions made in Washington are closely monitored by Moscow, because Moscow does see NATO as fighting in the conflict with Ukraine on the side of Kiev, and that's why Moscow is closely scrutinizing all these statements and everything that is put on paper. But interestingly, Moscow also took the chance to comment on the deliveries of F-16 fighter jets to Ukraine, with the Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova saying that the plan to deliver those F-16 to Ukraine shows that Washington is leading a war gang that is fighting against Russia. Another Russian lawmaker, Andrei Kartapolov, who heads Russian State Duma Defense Committee, has said that the deliveries will not change on the ground, will not change anything on the ground, and Russia has been long prepared to this development. But in general, the reaction to the NATO summit is that there is nothing good that can come out from this summit. All the decisions that are taken there will be hostile to Russia, and they will be leading only to further aggravation and escalation of the situation in Ukraine, with the Russian envoy to the United States, Anatoly Antonov, saying that not a single word about peace has been said in Washington, at least on the first day of the summit.
And what is the latest from Russia on the conflict in Ukraine, Dasha?
Well, we understand that Russia continues its military effort on the Kharkiv direction, where Russia says it is creating the so-called buffer zone to protect Russia's border regions against these strikes from the Ukrainian side. Interestingly, the Kremlin has also commented on the possibility of giving Ukraine the right to strike Russian territories with UK-supplied Storm Shadows, saying that Moscow is only seeing that as yet another escalation, and that's why the work on the establishment of this buffer zone is ongoing. So on the Kharkiv direction, we understand that the Russian armed forces have carried out 6 attacks against the brigades of the Ukrainian military. We also understand that the Russian military have been improving their combat positions along the entire front line. But speaking of Belgrade in particular, the attack by the Ukrainian armed forces, Russian officials say, have killed at least 1 person and injured 9 others in the Shebekina district of the Belgrade region. So certainly the understanding is that as this conflict continues, there is no chance at finding the negotiated solution as things stand now.
All right, thank you so much for that update from Russia, Dasha Chernyshova.
The Kremlin has denied that there was any disagreement between Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Vladimir Putin during talks in Moscow this week.
Now, on Tuesday, Modi appeared to refer to an attack on a Kyiv hospital, calling the death of innocent children painful and terrifying. He's now in Austria to discuss the conflict, from where our correspondent Johannes Pleshberger reports.
It is the first international trip since India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi started his 3rd term in office, and the ongoing conflict in Ukraine seems to be dominating his state visits, first to Moscow and now Vienna. Austria's Chancellor Karl Nehammer wants Modi to get on board with a peace plan for Ukraine. India and its fellow BRICS states like China can play an important role, Nehammer says.
Today we have talked about even stronger commitment and ways of getting the peace process back on track.
Bharat aur Austria shanti aur sthirta ki.
India and Austria both lay emphasis on dialogue and diplomacy for the rapid restoration of peace and stability.
Modi arrived in Vienna directly from a 2-day visit in Moscow, which was overshadowed by a lethal strike on a children's hospital in the Ukrainian capital Kyiv. The Indian leader told President Putin that the death of innocent children was painful and terrifying, but at the same time Modi was seen embracing Putin just hours after that attack. In Vienna, Modi was accompanied by a business delegation for a bilateral economic forum. India is one of Austria's most important trading partners outside the EU. Despite Austria's political efforts, however, India is likely to maintain its position of equidistance in the Ukraine conflict. Johannes Pleshberger, CGTN, Vienna.
You can get highlights from the week's news in Europe and China direct to your inbox from CGTN's Storyboard email newsletter. Sign up at europe.cgtn.com/newsletter.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, French President Emmanuel Macron makes his first public comments since Sunday's election. We'll tell you all about it next.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe with Robin Dwyer and Sally Burdett. The headlines again. China opens an investigation into possible trade barriers imposed by the European Union after a series of disputes.
China's inflation numbers miss expectations while pressure remains on consumer demand.
And F-16 fighter jets on their way to Ukraine as NATO works to Trump-proof its position in the conflict.
French President Emmanuel Macron has made his first public comment since Sunday's shock election result. His letter, published in local media, came as newly elected lawmakers arrived in Paris, where they will try to break a political deadlock. With no party winning a majority, informal talks on building a coalition are expected to continue over the coming days.
The left-wing alliance and Macron's centrist bloc have put forward bids to form a government, while the far right has blamed the president for the turmoil. Well, let's talk to our correspondent, Stuart Smith in Paris. So, Stuart, that letter from President Macron just made public. What does it say?
Yeah, so Macron has called for the mainstream political forces to form a coalition with a solid majority. And I'll just read a bit of what he said and then explain why it's interesting. He said, "I ask all political forces that recognise themselves in republican institutions, the rule of law, parliamentarism, a European orientation and the defence of French independence to engage in a sincere and loyal dialogue to build a solid, necessarily plural majority." And a few things there that some may disagree with. For example, the need for a coalition in the first place. We're at very early stages in talks, but already the Conservative Party has suggested it may be better to, instead of trying to create a coalition, which seems frankly impossible right now, to agree on particular bits of legislation and work through government that way. So a majority, the Conservatives suggesting, not needed. The other thing that Macron said in this letter is that no one has won. That seems uncontroversial. No one secured a majority and therefore a government can't be formed. Yet the left bloc, the bloc that received the greatest number of votes, have consistently been trying to convince people they have won, and therefore they have the right, because they received the most number of votes, to nominate their choice as Prime Minister. Another interesting thing is that Macron suggested there's no rush to come to a conclusion here. He said there will be he will be leaving a little time for the political forces to build the necessary compromises, and in the meantime the old government, the government that lost this election, came second place, will continue to govern in the meantime. Something else that's likely to anger not just the left bloc but potentially others on the right as well, who are saying this is a clear defeat for the old government and it's necessary to form a new one as soon as possible. So all the same problems as before, but a few guiding principles that it seems the French president would like to see respected.
So those discussions on who will form this new government are clearly still ongoing. Meanwhile, far-right party leader Marine Le Pen has accused the left of inciting a protest like the one that took place in the United States on the 6th of January.
Yeah, in order to explain that, a little bit of context, because Gabriel Attal, the former Prime Minister, the one who offered to resign but was told to stay by the President because of the complexity of these coalition talks, because he's still in place as Prime Minister, one member, in fact a former member of the far-left party France Unbowed, said that he believed this was the existing government trying to steal the election, and said that there should be a big popular march to the Prime Minister's residence and office to declare protest about that action. Now, Le Pen, the far-right leader, suggested that that was subversive, a subversive comment, saying that he had called for the Matignon, the residence, to be taken by force. The left said that's not what was the point being made here. It was simply a call for protest, not a call for subversion or to take anything on by force. But it's essential to understand the debate here, that the left feel like they've been robbed of their choice of Prime Minister, the right feel they've been robbed of a victory, and no one right now has a plan for government.
Stuart, thank you very much. Our correspondent Stuart Smith in Paris.
France's former First Lady, Carla Bruni, is being investigated on charges relating to her husband's 2007 presidential campaign. The wife of former French President Nicolas Sarkozy is accused of hiding evidence and committing fraud, reportedly linked to alleged Libyan financing of his presidential bid. Sarkozy himself is set to stand trial next year over the allegations.
Beijing has set up a high-level team to investigate food transport standards after reports emerged that cooking oil was being carried in the same trucks that transport fuel without being cleaned between shipments. Several cooking oil companies said they would launch their own investigations.
Samsung workers in South Korea have extended their strike indefinitely. The National Samsung Electronics Union says management has shown no sign of being open to talks. They've called on more workers to join the walkout to disrupt production lines. The union is demanding a 3.5% pay rise, an extra day off and a reform of the bonus system.
Before the pandemic, office space in San Francisco was hard to come by, with almost all commercial real estate occupied. But COVID-19 and the rise of working from home reversed that trend.
Yeah, and while restrictions have eased, mass layoffs mean vacancy rates continue to hit new records. Our correspondent Mark New reports.
On the streets of San Francisco, signs of empty space are all around. The city's office vacancy rate is around 30%, the highest of any major market in the U.S. A new report from commercial real estate services firm Avis & Young sets out some potential scenarios for getting the rate below 10%. They warn that if little is done, it could take the city 18 years or until 2042 to recover.
Trying to sound the alarm bell, if you just did nothing and waited for rising tide to lift all boats, it may take a very long time. You need to either redevelop your building into another use, right? So converting office to residential, to hotel, to something. Or you need to invest in your office building to make it more competitive.
Well, Granahan says one of the biggest factors is the downsizing of major tech companies. Google recently vacated this waterfront office in the financial district. Tech firm Salesforce has cut its footprint in the city by 45% in a single year.
I think companies are coming back slowly, but also companies figured out that you don't need to be in office all the time and you can save money on leases.
Headcount has gone down so much that how do you even fill in those vacant spots when there's no employees to fill it in with? The larger problem lies within actually having viable solutions to bring people back together.
If they started requiring people to come back to office more frequently, it brings back downtown. There's so much empty office space.
But just as tech has contributed to the city's problematic vacancies, it's also offering some hope. Near the end of last year, OpenAI, the makers of ChatGPT, moved into San Francisco buildings, taking up nearly 46,000 square meters of office space. Other AI companies, such as Anthropic, are also subleasing large San Francisco office spaces, too.
You can imagine there's hundreds of other companies that are in the early stage or not at the scale of OpenAI, but are the next version of that. We're particularly bullish on that segment of the market to come in.
According to Placer AI, which uses cell phone data to measure foot traffic, visits to San Francisco office buildings are down 50% compared to the same time in 2019. But since last year, visits are up 13%.
I think it's really important that the business community comes together, and by filling these office buildings will generate a lot more foot traffic. It'll become a snowball effect where it's going to help everybody.
Mark New, CGTN, San Francisco.
China is now the world's largest producer of electric cars.
Sales of Chinese EVs have been rising across Europe due to lower price tags and also some cutting-edge technology.
Our correspondent Mike Walter reports.
Oh, this is the part of the trip I was really looking forward to, my chance to get behind the wheel of some of these EVs here in China. But what I wasn't told was that the budget is really, really small, so this is all they can afford. It's one of these tiny EVs, but it does help you navigate some of these smaller roads, which you find were really kind of jammed with cars. You can see one right over here. But at any rate, I'm on my way now to try some of these other really expensive high-end EVs.
Nice to meet you, Mike. You can call me Sean.
Hi, Sean.
Yeah, my day job is I explain the Chinese car market to the world, and we put together a lineup of cars for you to experience. Each is distinctive in their own way.
Yeah, I can't wait.
This is the SSR. This is full carbon fiber.
Oh, my gosh.
We're going to have a go at this later.
Wow, it's beauty.
Talking about your own car,
yeah,
it's slightly less impressive.
I was going to say, it doesn't cost as much, does it?
Yeah, but this is the segment where China has the biggest advantage. And it's easy to park.
Yeah.
About the one behind you, this car is famous for its autonomous driving. We're going to go on the public roads later.
Wow, I can't wait. And then we've got another one.
Yeah. The big selling point of this car is that it can charge, but the killing point is it swaps.
Okay, I can't wait, but can we start with this one first?
Of course.
All right.
Let's try it. It's a lot of power.
Wow, this thing is like a rocket ship.
From 0 to 100, this car on the right time is under 2 seconds. Is your blood pressure okay?
So quick to accelerate, too. It really is a supercar, too. Let's see if I can sprint past everybody. Oh, my gosh. Amazing. And there's still more to it. I mean, I can really...
completely. As I said, to fully experience this car, you need to go to a track.
Kind of driving slow. I don't want to give it up.
We are now in the assisted driving mode. If you see this blue line appearing on screen, that means this vehicle is in control. We have camera vision on every angle. We have LiDAR to detect the distance.
All sides and way off in the distance, too.
Yeah. Put them all together. We put together a sensor system that is very robust.
It's just mind-boggling. I know that this is normal for you, but for a guy coming from the West who doesn't see this, it's pretty amazing.
With this big SUV, it's luxurious, very quiet. It also has a very good sound system. Let's try the karaoke bit, but to do that, we need to park the car.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, we meet the Chinese breakdancing instructor hoping to nurture the next Olympic gold medalist.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
Unprecedented scenes that we saw. The cleanup operation is now well and truly underway.
Parts of southern Europe remain in a state of emergency.
Context gives meaning. People make history.
Far more than 1,000 people have come here today.
But authorities are still on high alert.
So now we've actually become the border on this road.
A complex world demands a comprehensive view.
But with the cleanup efforts more or less under control,
the economic impact is bound to ripple across the country.
There's plastic pollution everywhere.
Because the world today matters for your world tomorrow.
This is the living area of the crew.
The focus is firmly on future technologies.
Well, this is something completely different.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
Welcome back. Now, the Netherlands and England are hoping to book a place in Sunday's Euro 2024 football final as they go head-to-head in just a few hours in Dortmund.
The winner will play Spain, who beat France on Tuesday, thanks to a wonder strike from the tournament's youngest ever goalscorer. Our correspondent Peter Oliver is in Berlin.
Spain have been the informed side at these European Championships. But when Kolo Muani scored France's first goal from open play at this tournament, some of their fans were looking nervous. Those same fans were sent into raptures after 21 minutes when 16-year-old sensation Lamine Yamal curled a glorious left-footed shot into the top corner to become the youngest ever goalscorer at the Euros. Since the moment that shot hit the net, pictures of a baby Yamal being held and bathed by footballing legend Lionel Messi back in 2007 have gone viral. Spain struck again on 25 minutes through Dani Olmo's trickery, guile and a large deflection to take the lead. Despite France throwing on all of their attacking options from the substitutes bench in the second half in search of a goal, it ended 2-1 to Spain.
They can reach the final, they can reach the champion, everything. Vamos! They had a fantastic comeback. Lamine Yamal, he did everything that match. It's great. It's perfect.
Spain are going for a record-breaking fourth European Championships win. They'll find out later it'll be the Netherlands or England that they'll play in the final. Both sets of fans have been partying in Dortmund ahead of that match, both confident that this could be their year.
The Netherlands and England are consistently ranked highly in world football, but both have repeatedly failed when it comes to major tournaments. For the Dutch, their one and only victory came back in 1988 at the Euros, also here in Germany. For England, an even longer wait. That was 1966 in the World Cup on home soil, their only ever tournament victory. But for one of these two teams, they're going to be looking to put that long wait to bed when they take on Spain here in the German capital on Sunday. Peter Oliver, CGTN, Berlin.
Alibaba has signed French-American basketball star Tony Parker as an Olympic brand ambassador.
He'll appear on adverts, on billboards and screens across Paris throughout the Games. The e-commerce giant's aiming to attract more international business to its platforms.
Now, breakdancing has officially broken into the mainstream and will debut at the upcoming Olympics in Paris.
Once part of a small subculture, breakers in China are now dreaming of becoming gold medalists. Our correspondent Li Xiong has the story.
I am 白鹿，然后我是北京体育大学的霹雳舞专项的老师，然后我也是一个职业的舞者。
Breakdancers like Bai are referred to as B-boys, B-girls, or simply breakers. With the sport gaining increased recognition in China, more and more young people are now joining the breaking community. Beijing Sport University included breaking as a major in 2020 after the International Olympic Committee added the sport to the Olympic program.
变化是特别的多，就是他进入奥运会之后，他相当于是从艺术变成了体育。
The inclusion of breaking in the Olympics and Asian Games has sparked a wave of interest among young people in China.
中国的选手其实现在，的确是有一些，特别是女孩现在取得了特别好的一些成绩，然后包括男子运动员在这次的，就是世锦赛当中也取得了非常非常好的成绩，然后这2年也是通过国家的一个大力的一个支持吧，然后中国的 breaking 是进步非常非常快的。
Breakdancing first gained popularity in China in the 1980s, when movies featuring this creative and energetic street dance hit theaters across the country. In recent years, breakdancing has experienced a resurgence, with various dance clubs opening up and international competitions held in China. Bai Lu established his own breaking club with his friends in 2016 after he participated in various competitions over the years.
Add it up.
For him, however, it's more about enjoying the art as a form of creative self-expression rather than dancing to win medals or accolades.
你要想 battle 的话，你首先你要每天重复那些动作，然后你重复它就是一个特别枯燥的一个过程。我不是特别喜欢重复，就有点像背课文一样，你每天要重复去背，然后场上的时候，然后就跟命题作文一样，你把你平时背的就给它写出来，然后你把你平时练的就给它跳出来。我也不想让自己那么紧绷，因为跳舞的话，它还是一件开心的事儿。
Bailu's passion for breakdancing extends far beyond the dance floor. As a dedicated teacher and an inspiring figure, he thrives to foster a vibrant community of young breakers in China. Li Qiong, CGTN.
No, I won't be trying that at home, Robin.
No,
Best not. All right, before we go, let's take a look at your headlines once more. China opens an investigation into possible trade barriers imposed by the European Union after a series of disputes.
China's inflation numbers miss expectations while pressure remains on consumer demand.
And F-16 fighter jets on their way to Ukraine as NATO works to Trump-proof its position in the conflict.
And that's it for Global Business Europe. Thanks for watching.
Coming up next on CGTN Africa Live, we'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place. From all of us here in London, goodbye.